turn to come and ask your questions. All right, with those announcements out of the way, now I have the pleasure of introducing our speaker for today, Maddie. Let's give her a warm welcome.
Hey everybody, how are you? Good morning. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Maddie, and I'm the ministry assistant here at the River. I am also currently a student at Princeton Theological Seminary, where I'm pursuing my Master of Divinity. And it's great to see you all this morning. We're in the middle of a sermon series titled 40 Days of Faith, Life in All Its Fullness. 40 Days of Faith is what we call Lent here at the River. It's the 40 days of preparation that lead up to Easter. This week, I want to spend some time talking about a topic that's central to living life in all its fullness, and that's how we find meaning in our work. And when I say work, I want to clarify what I mean because I'd like to define it somewhat broadly. Work can mean full-time employment for a company. It can mean freelancing on your own. It can mean caring for a person or household. It can mean going to school or volunteering. You get the idea. At its essence, work is how we participate in the ongoing creation and stewardship of the world. Many of us spend most of our waking hours working. Work is often where we find our primary community, and the things that we do at work are central to how many of us find meaning and purpose in the world. And that can be tricky as a Christian because, on the one hand, work can be a way in which we glorify God by exercising our gifts and demonstrating love for others. But it can also be something that takes us away from God and that encourages us to engage in behaviors or systems that are not reflective of God's love for us or for the world. Some Christians call that worshiping an idol, and today I want to spend some time examining what it is that we mean when we say that work can be an idol. What does it actually mean to worship an idol, and how is that different from loving your neighbor? How can we find meaning in our work even in the midst of flawed companies and people? And how does the story that we tell about our work impact how we see ourselves? We're going to examine these themes today by looking at a story from the book of Exodus, the story of Moses, the Israelites, and the golden calf. Idolatry is something that comes up a lot in the Hebrew Bible, and this is maybe the most famous story about it. Many of you have probably heard this story before. So with that, I want to just take a look at it. So the story says, when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered around Aaron and said to him, "Come, make gods for us." The next day and offered burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. And the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to revel. As soon as he came near the camp and saw the calf and the dancing, Moses' anger burned hot. And he threw the tablets from his hands and broke them at the foot of the mountain. He took the calf that they had made, burned it with fire, ground it to powder, scattered it on the water, and made the Israelites drink it. Now, normally when I hear people summarize this story and talk about what it means for us today, I hear something like this. This story is about the Israelites, who are supposed to be worshiping the God of Israel, the one true God. But they decide to worship a different God instead, and they're rightly punished for doing that. The Ten Commandments are very clear. They're supposed to only worship the God of Israel. They violate that by making idols and worshiping other gods. This means that we shouldn't make idols out of our material possessions, our relationships, or of worldly systems. And that interpretation resonates with many of us because we know that we have a tendency to orient ourselves towards things that don't bear the fruits of God's love for us. We know that we tend to make idols out of money, power, success, social affirmation, romantic relationships, family, politics, etc. And we know that when we worship those things, we tend to turn away from God's love for us, which makes it harder for us to then show love to the people around us. So then if that's true, if we know that worshiping idols leads us away from God and away from loving our neighbor, why do we do it? Why do we continue to center those things in our lives? Some Christians take a cynical view. They believe that we continue to make idols out of money, power, and success because people are inherently sinful. We're always going to be drawn to things that aren't God because at our core, we want to stray. We want to indulge ourselves. We don't want to do the right thing. We'd rather do whatever makes us feel good in the moment. That view of people doesn't fit with my experience. From what I see, most people generally want to do the right thing, even if it comes at our own personal expense. We want to love our neighbors. We want to be helpful. We want to live in accordance with our values. We might be tempted sometimes or distracted sometimes, but for the most part, we want to do good. So then what's the disconnect? Why is it that we all seem to be worshiping the wrong things in spite of the fact that we are, for the most part, all trying our best to do the right thing? Idolatry has always confused me. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot, and it's not entirely clear what it actually means. What do we mean when we tell someone to stop worshiping an idol? To start, how would we even identify or define what an idol is? The way that most people use the word, it seems like an idol can be anything. You can make an idol out of your love for someone, or out of a passion that you have for making the world a better place. You can even make an idol out of the Bible. And while I think we can agree that none of those things are God, what's complicated is that God is in all of those things. God is in the people around us and in our hopes and dreams, and God is certainly in the Bible. God is present in all of God's creation, and God is with us as we go about our day-to-day. And so, of course, we're going to want to show love for all of these things because at our core, we are loving people who want to do the right thing. We love the people around us. We celebrate our gifts and goals. We read the Bible with joy. So that begs the question, what does it mean to worship something? Is loving God's creation idolatry? Sometimes the way that we talk about idolatry makes it sound that way. For me, the concept of idolatry was always most confusing when it came to thinking about my relationship with work. I've heard a number of messages over the years warning me to not make an idol out of my work, to not worship work, and while I always appreciate the intent behind those messages, in practice, they didn't make sense to me. The reality of work always seemed a lot more complicated than that. A couple of years ago, before I started attending seminary, I was working for a mission-driven tech company here in New York City. And this mission-driven tech company, like many organizations, wasn't purely good or purely bad. It was a mix of things. We were a tech company that was providing public transit services to riders around the world. And because we were tech-enabled, those public transit services were cheaper and were able to reach places that hadn't had public transit before. We were serving all kinds of people who relied on us to get to work and to go to the grocery store and to get to critical doctor's appointments. A lot of people were really thankful for the services that we were providing, and if we hadn't been there, a lot of people wouldn't have been served by public transit at all. At the same time, the public transit tech that this company was selling to cities around the world was a work in progress, and oftentimes the company would overpromise and underdeliver. And that led to many people using our services who were late for work. Riders would sometimes tell us that they got fired because they were so consistently late using our services. People would miss their critical doctor's appointments because we just couldn't serve their rides on time. Some people would even get stranded out in the cold in the middle of the night because we couldn't serve their ride home. On top of that, while the public transit we were providing was cheaper, that was often because cities could use our technology to cut well-paying local transit jobs. So instead of hiring full-time drivers and giving them benefits, they could contract with contractor drivers. They could outsource through us the daily operation of their services to agents in El Salvador making less than $10 an hour. And there were a lot of people inside and outside of the company who had mixed feelings about all of that. And while the company touted the environmental benefits of our services, most of our transit services were car-based. It was a rideshare public transit company, and it was backed by ExxonMobil and a member of the Koch family who didn't like light rail. So our transit services were offering some environmental impact. We were expanding public transit, but it was kind of a mixed bag. The long-term impact of these was a little bit unclear. And I'm giving you all of that context, like why am I saying all of this? Because when we talk about our workplaces, it's always complicated. The organizations we work for are a mixed bag. They deliver products or services to people who need them, and sometimes they do it well and ethically, and sometimes not so much. And a lot of the time, it's not even entirely clear what it is exactly that they're doing or what the impact of it even is. And that just scratches the surface of the complexity of our workplaces. That's just looking at what our organizations do at a high level. It doesn't even begin to account for the complicated interpersonal dynamics that we encounter every day and the array of feelings and spiritual questions that come up for us as we go about our work. At this company, I managed a team of people who all had their own strengths and weaknesses and goals and opinions about what the company was doing. I worked alongside a number of people who were lovely and talented and very smart, but who could also be very frustrating at times. My role was not well-defined, and so people from other departments were often dumping all kinds of tasks and projects on me that I didn't have the bandwidth for, or that weren't really within my scope, and that sometimes led to a lot of friction. I had a manager and various superiors who were sometimes very supportive and other times extremely out of touch. There were all kinds of office politics to navigate, and while I developed a solid community of people at work who I could draw on for support, the friendships I had at work were always tinged with the knowledge that we were giving feedback about each other to our managers and coworkers, and that feedback had consequences for our growth at the company. A couple of years ago, as I was working for this company, I found myself grappling with what it means to idolize work. I would often wake up, sometimes at 5 or 6 a.m., to urgent messages about things that were going wrong in our transit services, and I'd lie in bed in my pajamas, barely awake, triaging the live situation, trying to manage it. From that point on, my day was back-to-back Zoom meetings, often without a break until 6 or 7 at night. And then in the evenings and on weekends, I'd get pinged with other live issues happening in these transit services. So all of that's to say, my life was dominated by work. And to some of the people around me, it looked like I was idolizing my work. I'd be out at dinner with people, on my phone, dealing with the latest crisis. I'd have to get up and leave all of the time to go deal with things. In the moments when I wasn't working, I was so exhausted that I'd throw on a TV show and just zone out. I struggled to have really meaningful conversations about things that weren't work-related. I didn't have meaningful hobbies outside of work. Relationships outside of work took a back seat and became pretty surface level. Maybe parts of that sound familiar to you. And when I frame it that way, it's pretty clear that there was a problem, but it didn't always feel that way. It's easy standing here years away from that experience to say that I was idolizing work. I was too invested in my own worldly success, in the affirmation I could get from others, or the money I could make if I got another promotion. But I don't know that that's actually the whole story. Because when I woke up every day in that job, I was loving my neighbor. I was working hard to lighten the load a little bit for my coworkers. I was supporting and advocating for the people I managed. I was serving the riders and drivers of the transit services that we were operating. I was trying to do right by my manager to make his life a little bit easier. I was trying to make the world a better place the best I could through my work. For most of the time that I worked at this company, I wasn't going to church, but wasn't I practicing agape by showing up for the people around me? Wasn't God in all the people who I was trying to support? Was I making an idol out of work, or was I loving the people around me just as God loved me? If you're the type of person who throws yourself fully into whatever it is that you're doing, maybe you've asked yourself a similar question. What's the difference between showing love and worshiping an idol? To answer that, let's return to the story of the golden calf for a moment. Because much like our relationship with work, this story is more complicated than it appears on its surface. This story is about the Israelites, a group of people who had a special relationship with the God of Israel. But who were the Israelites exactly? The Bible often portrays the Israelites as a distinct group of people who were set apart from other groups at the time, like the Canaanites. They were a separate group of people who had a separate history and separate beliefs and practices. The Israelites worshiped one God, the Canaanites worshiped a number of gods. The Israelites were liberated by Moses from slavery in Egypt and then conquered the land of the Canaanites. These were two different groups who were fundamentally at odds with one another. That distinction is important in the Hebrew Bible because it's how the authors made the Israelites' identity clear to the readers. What does it mean to be an Israelite? It means not being a Canaanite or an Egyptian or any of these other groups. And that's one reason why idolatry comes up so much in the Hebrew Bible. Moses and other leaders repeatedly condemn idolatry, and God punishes the Israelites for engaging in idolatry because worshiping other gods compromises their identity as Israelites. And that identity mattered because God had a special relationship with the Israelites. God made a covenant with Abraham and then delivered them out of slavery through Moses. God was with them. So when the Israelites begin worshiping idols in the wilderness, when Aaron makes a golden calf, that's a betrayal of their relationship with God. They're not acting like God's people. They're acting just like everybody else. I want to put forward another perspective on this story, however, because I think there's something else going on underneath the surface of this passage. There's a lot of scholarly debate around who exactly the Israelites were. And the short version is that it's not actually clear that the Israelites were a completely distinct group of people from the Canaanites, especially at the point in time when this story takes place. Many archaeologists and historians believe that the people we later came to know as the Israelites actually emerged from within Canaanite society itself. The earliest Israelite settlements, which were simple villages in the central highlands of Canaan, don't show signs of a violent conquest or foreign invasion like the book of Joshua might suggest. Instead, the material culture found at these sites, the pottery, the architecture, farming techniques, looks almost identical to that of their so-called Canaanite neighbors. That suggests that the Israelites weren't outsiders displacing another people group. They were likely former Canaanites who, for a range of social, political, or religious reasons, began to understand themselves as a distinct people. If we read the story of the golden calf through that lens, we get a bit of a different picture of what idolatry means in this context. Was it necessarily super clear to the Israelites at this point that there was only one God? Was it even clear to them that they were a distinct group of people from the Canaanites who were called to do things differently? If the Israelites had only recently begun to form a new identity, if they were just starting to imagine themselves as a people who followed God alone, then their act of building a golden calf wasn't necessarily a straightforward rejection of the God of Israel. It might have been an expression of worship that was shaped by the religious practices that they were already familiar with. In the ancient Near East, golden calves and bulls were common symbols of divine power associated with Canaanite gods like El or Baal. So it's possible that the Israelites weren't trying to abandon God altogether. They were reaching for the divine in the way that they knew how. They were scared. Moses had been gone a long time. They wanted reassurance. And so they did what made sense to them. They made something they could see, something that looked like the gods they'd grown up hearing about, and they called it the God who had brought them out of Egypt. I preached a few weeks ago about the practice of reading generously, and if I were to read the Israelites generously in this story, I'd say that this was a group of people who had been through a lot together. And in a moment when it seemed like they'd been abandoned by Moses, they didn't skip a beat. There's no mourning or grieving the fact that their leader has left them. They say, "As for Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. Moses, not sure where he went. Can you make us some new gods now?" They were so used to hardship at this point that they immediately said to themselves, "Okay, how are we going to survive this together?" They weren't thinking about honoring God or lamenting the loss of their beloved leader. They went straight into survival mode. How do we get through the next day, the next week? What do we need to do to just make it through this? And in that moment, they decided, you know what? We need something that can bring us together. We need something that's going to sustain us, because at the end of the day, we can only really rely on each other. This community is all we have at this point, so we might as well make that sacred somehow. Let's make something sacred that we know is ours and let it remind us of where we came from, and maybe that will get us through. So they took off their jewelry that they brought with them from home and melted it down, and Aaron made it into a golden calf. And in that moment, it probably didn't feel to them like they were betraying anyone. The line between being a Canaanite and being an Israelite was fuzzy. They were a group of people who were still figuring out their identity. These Canaanite gods were familiar, they were comforting, and loving those gods was a way of loving the people around them. It was a way of thinking differently about their communal identity so that they could survive. When I tell the story that way, you almost can't help but excuse the Israelites for worshiping idols. When I tell the story that way, is idolatry even a sin? I've been wrestling with idolatry lately because I know that I'm guilty of it. I have been guilty of it, especially when it comes to my relationship with work. But the problem is that it's only in retrospect that I can see it. When I was caught up in the day-to-day of my work at my last company, what I saw were the people directly in front of me who needed all kinds of things from me: managers, coworkers, direct reports, customers. I saw all the ways in which I could love them better if only I worked a little harder. There came a point when work was my only real community of people. It was my whole life. I was in survival mode, just trying to get through the next day, the next week. And I did whatever it took to get through. I had to make that meaningful for myself somehow, and so my work community became sacred to me. Those relationships became special through all kinds of shared rituals and through a shared commitment to doing our work well. We supported each other through the day-to-day craziness and the ups and downs of corporate life. In the moment, what I saw was the people in front of me who I wanted to love more, and what I wanted was for them to love me more, to get the next raise or promotion or shout out or recognition for my work. There was something very real about all of that, the relationships, the feelings, the good work. But while those people were real and that love was real and those accomplishments were real, as I became consumed by my work, I wasn't always seeing other realities. I wasn't seeing how my participation in a questionable corporate culture was contributing to an office environment that was exclusive of all kinds of people. The larger department I worked in didn't do a good job of hiring or promoting women, people of color, or queer people. And when I raised concerns about that, I was told that I wasn't demonstrating positive leadership and that in order to advance at the company, I would need to get on board. While I tried to balance advocating for people with placating management, I know that my willingness to play by the rules and to engage in office politics contributed to an environment that was actively exclusive. I also wasn't seeing how my work for this company was at times probably not serving the writers who we claim to serve, the direct reports I wanted to lift up, the coworkers I wanted to support, or even the managers to whom I felt a sense of loyalty. It was a flawed company, and we were all flawed people doing our best. And I think at times it was easy for us to put too much stock in what we were doing or how we were doing it because we knew the work was important. We collectively justified a lot of things that weren't great out of a sense of loyalty to each other and to the company's mission. And it took a while for me to be able to see outside of that reality. I started to get glimpses of other realities, though, when I'd see certain transit services that we were operating shut down. The city would end the service or find another operator. Or when people who were crucial to our operation would leave the company. Big changes like that helped me to see how temporary all the work we do can be. The work we were doing was important, but at the end of the day, projects and people come and go. And that knowledge that things do end opened a door for me. It helped me to see the possibility of something beyond what was directly in front of me. And that was important because up until that point, I wasn't seeing other possibilities for my life, other life paths that might allow me to love more people or different people or to love people better. I was good at managing chaos, but that meant that I didn't see other gifts that God might have for me. 3 years ago, I would not have predicted that I'd be here giving sermons or that I'd be in seminary. That wasn't something that I saw for myself. I wasn't even going to church. I didn't know any of you. I didn't see any of this. I just saw the people who were directly in front of me and knew that I wanted to love them better and for them to love me. Idolatry is hard to pin down because it's part of who we are as humans. It's not that we're all depraved, sinful people. It's that we can only see certain parts of God's reality at any given time. And when we cling to one part of that reality, we can sometimes mistake it for God when really it's just one part. Some biblical scholars believe that when the authors of the Hebrew Bible sat down to write the story of the golden calf, what they were really doing was looking back on the story of the Israelites and trying to make meaning of it. This group of people had been through so much slavery, wandering the wilderness, conquest, exile. Surely their journey together through all of that had to mean something. One way that these authors chose to make meaning of their suffering was by recasting their identity as something more concrete than it probably was. They were Israelites through and through the whole time, and they always had a special relationship with God, and their biggest mistake was not recognizing that sooner. The story of the golden calf is a way of grappling with their regret about not embracing their Israelite identity more fully. It's like they're saying, look, see, this is what happens when you don't embrace who you really are. We were a special group of people who had a special relationship with God, and we messed up by trying to be like everyone else. We should have been unabashedly ourselves the whole time. We should have stuck with Moses even when things were hard. But instead, we chose to go back to what was comfortable. We chose to be like everyone else. We chose to worship the golden calf. That's why we suffered, because we weren't willing to see it through. When I tell the story of why I left my last company, it can sometimes sound like this. Silly Maddie Abbott. You got so caught up in office politics and your own abilities and all the raises and promotions and recognition. Why couldn't you see all along who you really were? You opted for the comfort of pleasing the people directly in front of you instead of the uncertainty of a life outside the structures of their approval. That's why you were so miserable. You idolized your workplace. Thank God you realized it eventually and left. I don't know that that version of the story does justice to it, though. Was I always a preacher underneath it all? Or did I become one bit by bit as I wrote a different life for myself? If I had stayed and loved the people in front of me as best I could, what story would I be writing now? Calling something an idol is a way of telling people who we're not. When I say that I idolize my work, what I'm telling you is that I'd like to be the kind of person who doesn't feel beholden to the approval of a toxic corporate culture. I'd like to believe that at my best, I'm strong enough to love the people in front of me without needing them to affirm me. Did I need to leave my job to become that person? Or was there another way to get to the same place? There's another story I could have written for my life, a story that involved staying at my job, not going to school, and not working here. It's a story that would have required me to figure out how to move differently in the world, even as I stayed right where I was. And in some ways, that's a lot harder. That story doesn't sound nearly as clear-cut. It probably involves a lot of compromise that I would really resent. But is that story any more idolatrous than the other story? Did I really stop worshiping idols when I left my company? What realities am I not seeing in this moment? What will I look back on 3 years from now and discover about who I am and who I've always been? I know a lot of people who are searching for meaning in their work right now. This is a really tough job market, and most people who are fortunate enough to be employed are probably going to need to stick it out where they are for a bit. Pivoting is just not as much of an option as it was immediately post-COVID. And I know a lot of people who are frustrated by that. They're unhappy where they are, they want to make a change, but it's just not panning out. I also know a lot of people who aren't even looking for a change, who are fine where they are, but who have just grown so tired of being in survival mode all of the time. Work takes up so much of our lives. It's where many of us find our primary community. It's one of the primary ways in which we give back to the world. And as rewarding as that can sometimes be, it can also leave us empty. Surely our work must mean something. It can't just be an idol. But at the same time, there must be something more than this. Wherever you are in your journey of work, whether you are searching, stuck, content, bored, frustrated, transitioning, pursuing work in the home, or volunteering, there are people in front of you who you can choose to love. And choosing that is a beautiful expression of your faith. And it does matter. And it does make a difference to the people around you and to the world. The little things you do on a daily basis to lighten the loads of the people around you are sacred. God is in them. God is in the hours you spend making sure you do things well. God is in the people you're serving through whatever work you do. But God is also in all kinds of things you haven't seen yet and can't even begin to imagine. God is in the risk you take when you decide to step away from your work, even if it's just for a few minutes. God is in the doubts you have about your company. God is in the moments when you glimpse another way of being in the world, even if you have to stay in the space you're in for now. And it's when we can hold those things together, the love for what's in front of us with the knowledge that what's in front of us is not everything. That's when we get a little closer to living life in all its fullness. Because there are pieces of God in our idols, but only pieces. And it's only when we pray to God that we begin to encounter something whole. 2.5 years ago, I showed up at the river work addicted and alone. And the people I met here opened doors for me to other realities and other possibilities about myself that I hadn't seen before. And that eventually led me to leave my job and to live a very different life. And as I've lived that life, I've found a new way of being in the world, regardless of where I am. If you're here, you already know that there's more to life than work. But maybe you're searching for what exactly that something is. If that's the case, I hope you're able to find glimpses of another reality here just by connecting with others and paying attention to what they're telling you about God's love for you. And I also hope that you're able to be that person for others here, to tell them how God's working through them to make your life a little better. When you do that, you open a door for the person in front of you to a world that they might really like. With that, I'd like to invite the worship team back up as I close us out in prayer. Gracious God, we're trying our best to live out your word in the world, but it's hard. Too often we find ourselves living in survival mode, just trying to get through the day. As we head into another week of work, help us to love the people you've put in front of us, to see the doors you've opened for us to something more, and to open those doors for others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.